Yes, it worked. Yay. Hi, everyone.
Yay.
I'm Gina Robertson, the founder and publisher of the On Purpose Woman magazine and the founder of On Purpose Woman Global Community. I'm here for our Writer in the Spotlight, where I talk with the writers, the contributing writers to On Purpose Woman magazine. And I'm speaking today with Gina Hogan Edwards, who is Gina, tell them who you are, because I just left that piece off somewhere. So
No problem. Hi, Jenny. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm a creativity coach. I'm an editor, I'm a retreat facilitator, and I am also a facilitator of our local chapter of On Purpose Woman.
Yes, you are in Tallahassee, Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you wrote an article called Boost Your Creativity, and it was part 2. You'd already written part 1 for the January, February issue. And the subtitle is It's a Gas, Gas, Gas. And I'm going to go into grazing in the grass, right?
Yes.
So why did you decide to write this series of articles? Because I don't know how many you're going to have, but there's going to be another one, right?
I'm sure there probably will be. So as a creativity coach, naturally, I have always been fascinated with the process of creativity, how we experience it or don't experience it. I think we have a tendency to put a lot of magic around the process of creativity and think that it's very mysterious. And while there is still a lot of research that's done on like what happens in our brain, and we're not clear about all of that, there are some very fundamental things about creativity that we forget sometimes. And one of them is that it's innate. We're all born creative. And it breaks my heart when I hear someone say, oh, I'm not creative at all. Yeah. And so that was one reason that I wrote the articles, because I wanted to remind everybody that, yes, you are creative. A lot of times it's just because you haven't tapped into that recently.
I love what you said about we tend to think of it as a magical experience, I guess, only available to a unique few, right?
Right. And it can feel magical, when we're in the flow, when we're in that process of creating something seemingly from nothing, it does feel like magic.
I'm guilty of being one of those women who, for the first probably 35 years of my life, would say this: I don't have a creative bone in my body. And I believe that because I never did art. I practically flunked sewing. in home ec class. I was so bad at it. I just couldn't read directions right. There was just all this other stuff going on. And I wasn't much of a writer yet. I didn't do any of those things that I always associated with creativity. And I was a keynote speaker at an event in, I think it was Clemson University's Professional Development for Women seminars. I've been doing them around in different cities over a course of a number of years. And I was chatting with one of the speakers after my opening keynote, and she was showing me some art that she had done and something. And I went, oh, I don't have a creative bone in my body. And she said, well, who wrote that talk you just did? And it was eye-opening. I went, oh, I did. And I did it really easily. And I did it. And I delivered it really well. That's creativity as well. So that's when it started to open up for me that, yeah. And I now cringe when I hear another woman say that,
there are so many modes of creative expression. And, when you were trying to sew, you just hadn't found yours yet.
I had not found, it was not mine to do, but they forced us into those little boxes.
I relate on the sewing front. I tried that too, and that one's not for me.
Yeah. So in your article, you write that it is available to all of us. It is innate. And that sometimes it's not showing up because we're putting ourselves, or we're like floundering, I think you called it, in conditions where creativity cannot thrive. So there are things that I guess we're surrounding ourselves with, or are like intrinsic to our lives sometimes, that there's no room for creativity. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. There are 5 main things that I think cause us to believe that we're not creative, or to put us in a state where we can't be creative. But there's something foundational and cultural that happens before that even, As a culture, we tend to teach creativity out of our children. Children are just naturally creative. Like I said, we're born with it, but the structure, especially of our school system and, standardized testing and all that, I feel like that teaches the creativity out of us. But then as adults, we enter into all kinds of circumstances that can inhibit our creativity. And the first and most obvious one is stress. And I think any one of us has probably been in a situation where we're so stressed that our mind is foggy, we can't think straight, we don't notice things, we sort of have tunnel vision when we're experiencing stress. Our mind can't wander in a playful way when we're under stress, and it just robs us of our energy and of any kind of inclination to be imaginative.
And I hadn't thought of that until I read your article, but it also, I guess, fans out into trying to make any kind of decision, trying to make any kind of solution. It's why we can't do that when we're stressed, because those are also creative endeavors when we're trying to find a solution to a problem. And then
Absolutely.
we say things like, I'm so overwhelmed, I just can't, and so we can't expect to be then to get into that creative space if that's what's running our lives in the moment.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
How do we not do that?
Well, do you have about an hour?
I was going to say that's a book, isn't it? Any suggestions as to how we might?
Well, I'll tell you one way I got out of the stress was I left the corporate world.
Yeah.
It's the ways to reduce the stress, of course. Self-care. Really evaluating what your environment is like and the things that you're dealing with, and those are going to be unique for each individual. So there's no one prescription for how to minimize the stress, but obviously if you can minimize the stress, then that's going to contribute to your ability to get into that creative state.
And you'll be on the real plus side, because not only have you eliminated some of the stress, you've added in the creativity, which also boosts everything else, all the good endorphins and all the great feelings. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Creativity, it sparks joy. It increases our cortisol. It's a feel-good experience for us. And ultimately, because creativity is a part of our self-expression, it also increases our self-esteem.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, what's another condition that we might find ourselves in that hinders creativity?
Another condition is what I call a cocoon of safety. We tend to stay within environments that feel safe. And a lot of times that is surrounding ourselves with other people and circumstances that are in alignment with what we believe and what we want to do. And we don't venture out to expand our horizons, to expose ourselves to maybe beliefs or values or circumstances that are, out of our normal sphere. And it is also the place where our confirmation bias lives. And our confirmation bias is our tendency to look for things that support what we already believe. And so when we get in this cocoon of safety, we just don't have an opportunity to sort of expand our minds and to support our curiosity.
I was waiting for that word, curiosity. Yeah. Why is curiosity so important for our creativity?
Oh man, there is nothing like having a sense of wonder to nurture our creativity. When we're curious, we can expose ourselves again to things that are not in our normal environment. We can go down, you can call them rabbit holes if you want to, but there's a little bit of a negative connotation to that. And I like those rabbit holes. If you're curious, you can go down avenues to explore things that are not part of your normal world. And I think that exposes us to things that just expand the opportunity for us to make connections with things that may not seem to have a connection. And that's part of the whole creative process, is our mind making connections between and among things that on the surface may look like they don't have any kind of connection. And that's where the creativity comes in.
I think I mentioned to you a while back that I was doing a talk for a local spiritual center, and they had a theme for a month, which was courage. And then what they wanted me to talk about I'm sorry, the theme wasn't courage, it was curiosity for the month. And I could pick something to talk about curiosity. And I chose the courage to be curious. And I opened up with, without saying anything else, I said, Mother, you're going to raise one ignorant child if you don't start giving me better answers than that. Because I was an extremely curious little girl, and my mother would answer a lot with, because I said so, that's just how it is. You know, you're asking too many questions. Don't do that. Stop doing that. And I just apparently said, and she, mentioned this until I left home, that I had done this to her, because apparently I put my hands on my hips and got real indignant about it. But it was
sassy little girl.
Yeah, sassy little girl. But I associate that sometimes with maybe the creativity getting more stifled, because I started to realize that I better behave, because there were consequences to pay for my curiosity.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying about, we're born with it, but our culture tends to tamp it down. And it is especially, I think, an issue for girls who are taught to be quiet and be good. And so, we may hold back when we have that urge to explore something. If we're not supposed to get into the middle of things or get into trouble, then we hold back and we're not as curious, and that hinders our curiosity, hinders our creativity.
Yeah. And I had never made that real connection before until I was writing that talk and then having conversations with you about all of this. So are there other ways that we are kind of stifling our creativity?
There sure are. One of them is we rely on what's called our schema. And what our schema is when we do our subconscious when we're fed a whole lot of information, our subconscious sort of does a mashup of all the things that we're already most familiar with. And so the example that I give in the article is I ask the reader to imagine a luxury restaurant, that you're out to dinner with family and friends at a luxury restaurant. And so take a minute to imagine that. And then if you have imagined maybe dark red, carpeting on the floor, round tables, white tablecloths, a lot of people, probably the majority of people, those will be elements that will have come up for them when I offered the prompt of imagine a luxury restaurant. And that's because we do this mashup of the things that we have most commonly seen, because that helps our brain process things more quickly. And while that's efficient, it hinders our creativity. It holds us back from imagining other possibilities.
Is that the same thing or similar to mind mapping? In a way that's like, where have I seen that? Where have I seen that before kind of feeling?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that, but sure, in a way it is, because on that subconscious level, we are making connections, actually making the connections with the most obvious things, with the things we can already relate to, that we're already familiar with. And that's
safe, doesn't it? It makes us feel safe. Yeah.
It absolutely makes us feel safe. It keeps us in that cocoon of safety that we mentioned earlier. Yeah. And it's also related to one of the next things that can inhibit our creativity, which is a closed mind. And that's when we're just not willing to, to use our curiosity, when we're not willing to explore beyond the boundaries of safety.
They all kind of mesh up together, don't they? If we
do
work on one, it'll probably help to maybe ease up some of the other areas.
For sure.
Yeah.
For certain.
Is that all 5 now? Did we touch all 5?
No, we've got one more. Lack of practice.
Oh, yeah, good one.
And, when we say to ourselves, oh, I don't have a creative bone in our body, we're not willing to do that practice. And one thing I've noticed about adults, we don't like to have beginner's mind. And oftentimes to engage in creativity, we need to be willing to have that beginner's mind. We need to be willing to explore, to really lean into that curiosity. There are 3 stages that I suggest for sort of practicing creativity. And the first one is gathering. And that's when we just consume everything that's around us. We notice things. We may be doing a lot of like movie going, reading, watching TV. All of those contribute to, feeding us with ideas, but also we may just be daydreaming. We may be, gazing out the window. A friend of mine does call it the window gazing period. And the problem with this stage, this gathering stage, on the surface, it looks like nothing is happening.
I'm going to say, you're talking about all the things we're told we're not supposed to do. We're wasting time, right?
Right. It can look like wasting time. It can look like being lazy. It can just look like total inactivity. And so it's the stage that too many of us are unwilling to enter into, because it's the stage we have to give ourselves permission to let our minds wander.
Wow, super uncomfortable for some of us.
Yes, definitely. But you have to trust in that process, because that is one of the most important stages. And it does happen at that sort of subconscious level. And then the second step in practicing is actuating. And that's both, that operates on both the subconscious and the conscious level. And that's when we're just playing with all of these ideas that have come in during the gathering process. And we start to kind of accumulate and just see what's going to happen with them, see where there might be connections. So again, it's kind of on the subconscious and the conscious level that we're in the actuate stage. Then we move on to the shaping stage. And that's definitely a more conscious level, where we're shaping whatever it is that we're planning on doing, where we're assessing what we've accumulated and making a more deliberate connection between things to come up with whatever this thing is that we want to bring into the world.
Well, I'm going to tell anybody who's watching, if you want to fill in any gaps here, because we don't have enough time today to go through all of Gina's article, but you can read it. And it is in the text of this video, as is Gina's website. So you can find out more about her over there. And I just got re-inspired about some things that I'm thinking about doing. But I mean, I'm seeing this connection here for those 5 things. Aside from maybe the stress piece, all of the other ones are messages that we've gotten that said, shouldn't do that, shouldn't be that, shouldn't that, they're just all old messages.
Yes.
And probably it could be that because we're tamping down those messages, or we don't want to react to that driving thing inside of us that says it's okay to do this, that can also cause stress. So I think it's all mished in there and mixed up together, and just like getting in our way. Yeah. I love this, Gina. Thank you so much. And tell our viewers how they can find out more about you and what you have going on.
Sure. They can always go to my website, ginahoganedwards.com. I'm also the host of a Facebook group called Women Writing for Change. So if you are a writer, would love to have you there. And then in May, I'm hosting a writing retreat. We have 9 women coming down to the beach on the Gulf of Mexico. And since it seems like a lot of women are ready to re-engage in person, they want to get together with other writers and be inspired by each other and learn from each other, we're going to do another one in November. And there are still spots available in that one. And there's more information on my website about that.
Okay.
And again, if you're a writer, I also host a podcast called Around the Writer's Table. And there's a website for that, aroundthewriterstable.com.
Is there also information on your website to get there, or?
Yes. Yeah, there's a link from my website to the
Okay,
podcast page as well.
Well, then I invite everyone to check out Gina's work, her amazing spirit, her brilliance, and she's just so good at this creativity thing. She's got me hooked on thinking that I might do some stuff that I never thought I even wanted to do, much less think I could. You know what I mean? It's very exciting.
Terrific.
Well, Gina, I'm going to sign off in just a minute, but do you have any last words of wisdom for anyone watching?
I guess the main message here is that if you have been telling yourself that you're not creative, at least be willing to entertain the possibility that you are, and just open your eyes and see what over the coming days, you might be able to notice that you haven't noticed before.
Thank you. Thank you. Final great words. And I want to thank anyone who's watching this. I am Ginny Robertson, the founder and publisher of On Purpose Woman magazine and founder of the On Purpose Woman global community. And you've been watching our Writer in the Spotlight, where we highlight the writers for On Purpose Woman magazine. Thanks for watching.